Yeah, welcome. This is our first call, the official call of the Live Free Mentorship Community. And I am, so it is me and another member here, a part of the group. We are recording this. I'm going to leave names and so forth off the recording portion here just for privacy's sake. But this first call, there are two of us here. There are six currently a part of the whole membership community, but I am kind of doing a dance between picking times that are good for me while also trying to make it accessible, obviously, to the members, times that are good and accessible for other people. And so right now, as at the time of this recording, we're a little over a week away from Christmas, and so I'm sure there's a lot of different busy things going on. But the whole goal of these calls is that it would be a time of expanded teaching. We plan them for about an hour. It'd be a time of 20, maybe 30-minute teaching, and then a half, 30 minutes to 40 minutes of just discussion, connection. And it's all virtual, so there's a level of safety or hiddenness in the fact that we're not in the same room with each other. I do think it's most powerful if we can share with each other, see who each other is, see who is also walking this journey. But I do also want to respect privacy of people's journeys. And you're totally, if you are not on this current call because you just weren't sure about showing up in a meeting like this, just want to reiterate again that you're welcome to come, have your camera off, and have your name just enter anonymous or ABC or whatever you want in the name, and then you'll just be a part of the call, and we won't know who you are. So don't let fear keep you from joining the call. And even as an anonymous member, you can participate in the chat and ask questions and so forth. But also, I want to invite you into the community. There are those of us that are a part of this journey, regardless of what stage of the journey we're at, we can identify with the struggle and the things that we're going through. And one of the things that I worked really hard when I wrote the book Live Free is I had grown up hearing people talk about their struggles with lust or moral failings, and it was kind of vague terminology, and I would hear stories, and I often thought, this was as like a 15, 16-year-old youth, it's like, yeah, but you haven't done what I've done. You haven't searched the thing that I searched or looked at the certain websites or even thought some of the things that I've done. And I really wanted to kind of strip that down. Without my first iteration of the book, some friends gave caution about, maybe you shouldn't be quite this explicit. And so I toned a few things back. And one of the things that one of the praises I've been grateful to hear about the book was that it seems to have balanced that well. It wasn't overly explicit, overly sensational, but it did strip. Obviously, I wrote the book when I was 26, 27. I forget how old I was. 2018 is when it was published. I wrote it in 2016. What are we at now? 2025. Almost 10. Yeah, I was like 25, 26 years old when I wrote it. So there's a lot of life that I hadn't lived. There are some people reading the book that probably are like, you haven't done what I've done. People struggling for years, older, whatever. But I am grateful that there are a lot of young men, even young women, I've been surprised who are like, wow, you were able to be real in a way that made me feel like I wasn't crazy or abnormal. I don't have sexual abuse in my story, whether that's me participating in it or receiving sexual abuse. So there's a lot of dynamics about my story that are different and that would add complexity to somebody's journey. So all of that to say that 5-minute ramble to say that this my desire is that this would be a space where, regardless of what your story is, you are safe. I guarantee you, even though I may have not written about it, I have worked with men, I've worked with young people where I've heard all kinds of stories, and pretty sure you can't scare me away. May lead me to spend more time on my knees, but you can't scare me away. So, having said all that, the place I wanted to start today, you should have received so far the first session of the Live Free course, which basically just casts a vision and invites us to reflect on just what is freedom and how free are we. So the first session is freedom is possible, and it in that session I tell the story of the PBS's Victoria series, where Lord Melbourne is he has a wife who's been who's very withdrawn, actually relocated out from where he was living in his during his time of politics. And so he's deprived. We might look at him as being deprived sexually. Queen Victoria comes and proposes to him. And there's this, oh, I should have said, um, I have a daughter who is running a fever right now. And to help out my wife, I've been holding her as she's pretty much just sleeping. Every now and then she wakes up and moves around. So if you hear some noise, that's what's going on here. But back to Lord Melbourne and Queen Victoria, the PBS series depicts it, I think, in a very profound way. Queen Victoria comes out, they're in private, she proposes to him. I don't know how real, how accurate that is to what actually happened. It is true that Lord Melbourne and his wife were not sexually active. They weren't that close. His wife was very depressed and struggled with mental health, not very engaged in his work in politics. And it is true that Queen Victoria, at the very least, made it known that she wanted him to be her husband. And so Queen Victoria holds the power, and she's giving herself to Lord Melbourne. And Lord Melbourne, I'll let you go watch the scene for yourself, but he just very gently steers her direction, reminds her that he is married, and he's out. The setting is he's out at his country home watching rooks, and he talks about how rooks mate for life. And one of the scenes that, or one of the things that he says in that scene that is always sticks with me is, if I had spent more time watching the rooks, maybe my wife would have never left me. And Queen Victoria reassures him, I would never leave you. And he says, yeah, I know you wouldn't. But like the rooks, I mate for life. And that scene, when I watched it, I don't know, when did that come out? 12, 14 years ago? That scene was very profound because even at that time I was married, I was a young married man and living in a level of freedom. I found myself like, man, what would I do in that moment if it was private, nobody else is watching, and here's a very powerful woman giving herself to me, wanting me. There was something inside of me that kind of was like, man, I don't know if I'd have the strength to do what Lord Melbourne did. And I have used that as the picture of freedom. Freedom is when we have control and power over ourselves and our bodies and our desires, and are able to channel them. And it's not freedom isn't just the abstinence of porn. We can do a lot of things to get porn into the peripheral, to create boundaries around us. But there can still be that thing inside of us that if somebody gives themselves to us, or if the context is just right where we could dabble in a little lust and get away with it, where there's no strength. Bruce Langman in his book To Kill a Lion talks about it lust being like a lion inside your chest that you're trying to keep in its cage. That's not true freedom. That's not what real freedom is like, is where there isn't that lion, where I am free to steer the Queen Victoria, remind her, no, I mate for life. Whether or not I'm married, where I am committed not to just sexual pleasure, but to sexual holiness and righteousness. So that's all. That's what session one is about. But one of the places I want to start here in these mentoring calls is getting honest about sin, and something that the Live Free course lacks, believe it or not, as as I am few years removed from producing that, is conversation around the reality of sin, and how, even as I look back, I look back 12, 13, how old am I? 34. So actually like 16 years of quote unquote freedom, where I'm not looking at pornography. There have been a lot more things that have happened in my life where I was not vigilant against the way sin manifests in myself. And there have been seasons, even within the last 5 years, where I found myself struggling with sexual temptations in a way that I hadn't for over a decade. And I believe, in part, and as we continue through this journey, I'll share more of some of those things. But part of that was kind of losing sight of the reality of sin. And so if we see if my mouse clicks through here, there are 5 frameworks that the Bible uses to talk about sin, and I want to go through these. Don't want to spend a ton of time going through these right now, but I do want to set the stage. The first one is very common. Sin is missing the mark. If you look up sin in the Strong's dictionary, that's the number one definition: is sin is missing the mark. Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Another way the Bible talks about sin is that it's broken relationship, and we get that in Genesis 3, where God is walking through the garden and Adam and Eve run and hide. They're afraid. Isaiah 59 says, your iniquities, this is Isaiah speaking to the people of Israel, your iniquities have separated you from God. So there's no longer, what's interesting about the book of Isaiah is God refers to himself as the Holy One of Israel. And there's not the often, God often talks about himself as Israel as my people. I am your God. I am your holy. I'm kind of pulling from memory here some of the ways he talks about himself outside of Isaiah. But in the book of Isaiah, God separates himself while still, being the God of Israel. He's the Holy One of Israel. And there's not quite the same intimacy, because in the book of Isaiah is where we get the culmination of the fact that God's people have just continued to sin and sin and sin and sin. And at the time of this recording, we're a little bit away from Christmas. I'm preaching on Sunday, and I'm going to be speaking on Isaiah 64, one of my favorite passages, where God's people are crying out that he would burst through the heavens and come down. They have realized they cannot save themselves, and they need God to come and save them, and they realize their separation from God. So sin is, yes, it's missing the mark. Sin is a broken relationship where you're no longer naked and unashamed in the garden. You're no longer God's people specifically, but you're separated from God. Your iniquities, another way of talking about sin, have separated you from God. The Bible also talks about sin as enslaving power. John 8:34, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Romans, I think every one of us in this, watching this right now, can identify with this wrestling of, I do not understand what I do, what I want to do, I don't do, but what I hate, I do. And that cycle of shame and sin and guilt. And wanting something different, but not feeling like we can get out of it. Sin is an enslaving power. Sin is distorted desire. Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desires and enticed. Jeremiah, God said, they have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and dug their own cistern. So God's people are trying to find the life and the water that they need, but they're trying to do it themselves instead of coming to the source of living water. And the flesh desires what is contrary to the spirit. And one of the, I'm not going to go into this right now, but I actually have some other resources, and the course gets into it a little bit. I'm going to have to review how in depth. I may drop some of those other resources in here, but one of the things I wrestled with was the idea that like my desire is bad. And I would argue scripture is full of a narrative that God wants us to desire things. He wants us to desire relationship, connection, pleasure, even. The question for all of us, though, is how are we going about to get those desires filled? And so I have it stated here: sin as distorted desire. Maybe it'd be better worded: sin as uh, going someplace else for fulfillment of desire. The Bible also talks about sin within the larger redemptive story. Romans 5:20, where sin increased, grace increased all the more. 1 John, the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil. Colossians, he forgave us all our sins, disarming the powers and authorities. Revelation, I am making all things new. That's what Jesus is doing for you and I today. There is a reality of sin, and it's important that we remember that. I didn't have this passage on here, but Romans 8 talks about where those of us filled with the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly, just as all of creation groans, because creation is held in bondage to corruption. We are waiting for the day of adoption as sons. So even when we feel that groaning, in Romans 8, Paul likens it to childbirth and the pangs of childbirth, that utter anguish and exasperation with whatever we're struggling with over and over again. That's not necessarily a sign that we don't have the Holy Spirit. That's a sign that we are still living in a fallen, broken world. And that God is, and what we can remember in that is that God is redeeming it. He is active and he's doing something in this moment. That's just kind of sets some biblical framework for it. Paul David Tripp says in his book, New Morning Mercies, sin causes us all to insert ourselves into the center of our worlds, making life all about us. Sin causes us all to insert ourselves into the center, making life all about us. This is, maybe it helps us get a little bit more practical, because hopefully you thought, as I'm talking here, you thought about sin as like struggling with porn or the obvious lust, manifestations of lust and sexual sin. But what I want to get at is that sin actually shows up other ways first. And that's what Paul David Tripp is getting at here, is it places us at the center. He goes on to say sin causes us to look horizontally for what can only ever be found vertically. We look to creation for life, hope, peace, rest, contentment, identity, meaning, purpose, inner peace, motivation to continue. Why should I live another day, or why should I get up in the morning? Well, there's something in creation that it's easy for me to look to, my job, or there are certain financial goals that we're trying to accomplish. Like, that's why I get up and do these things. But that is looking horizontally to something that can only ever be found vertically. Not saying that working hard and hitting financial goals are sinful, but looking to them as the thing that keeps us going. That's a manifestation of sin. To step back, for the sake of time, I'm not going to read through this. I think most of us are familiar with this passage, but if you're not, go to Genesis 3. Here's the first 7 verses, but read Genesis 2 through 3, where you have God communicating to Adam and Eve that he's given them everything in the garden, everything that they need for life. And he's blessed them to eat of the tree in the midst of the garden. But then we have here, and I'll just point out, whoops, that went ahead. The devil comes and he poses this question. Did God really say that? And the woman responds, we're not supposed to eat or even touch of the tree in the middle of the garden or we'll die. And the serpent says, no, you will not die. In fact, God knows that if you ate it, you would be like him, knowing good and evil. And that introduces this cosmic struggle that all of us are facing now today, is that are we going to trust God? If I come back to some of these things that Paul David Tripp pointed out, am I going to trust that what God says gives me life will actually give me life, will actually give me hope, peace, contentment, identity? Or do I not trust that God's actually going to give me that? I have to go find that on my own. One way we could summarize sin is attempting to fix shame on our own. All of these things, whether we attempt to fix shame on our own, so the things we end up doing miss the mark. We attempt to fix shame on our own, and so we go to someplace other than God to feel safe, which is what Adam and Eve did in the garden. They went and hid. They sewed fig leaves together. We attempt to fix shame on our own, and so we don't take our desires to God for fulfillment. Instead, we try to find these different ways throughout creation that our desires can be fulfilled. That's what sin is. And our coping mechanisms can give us insight into shame. These are 4 very common coping mechanisms. We work a lot. That was one that when I'm feeling shame, and just for the sake of clarity, I don't know that anybody wakes up and is like, oh, I'm feeling shame right now, and so I want to go work. We're feeling negative emotions, discouragement, just, a classic temptation. I have a home office, and all of my work, even when I'm not writing and blogging, I work for a marketing agency. So everything is here at home. And there are times when, with my wife or children, my family, I'm out of control. I don't know how to fix the situation. The things I try to do aren't helping. Everybody's attitudes are really sour, and I feel this pull to just go down to my office and do some work, because I can do that. I can control that. I can feel a sense of everything's okay. Well, that's shame. That's shame rising up in me. And so I cope by going and tackling something I know how to do. Binging, whether that's with food, whether that's with entertainment, whether that's even with sex. I think that even within a marital relationship, where biblically speaking, yes, you can have sex, as much sex as you want. When we're not emotionally healthy, we can actually be looking to each other to feel the thrill and the pleasure and the relief from any sense of shame and pain. So any form of binging where it's almost like you can't stop it. There was a few years ago where my wife and I were going through a a really traumatic time in the ministry that we were a part of. And I was in the middle of Bible college at the time. And it was this time of the year. It was right at Christmas break. And I got done with the semester finals and so forth. And there was a new TV show that we discovered. And we watched an episode or 2 of it. And I was really fascinated and pulled into the storyline. And I found myself during the Christmas break staying up late watching on my phone. My wife and I, we would sometimes start. We have every now and then we still do this, but we for a while we would watch a TV show together in bed right as we're going to bed. Well, I found myself like going farther. My wife's sleeping. It's late at night. My excuse was it's holiday, but there was something further going on that I didn't pay enough attention to at the moment. And there was this sense that I couldn't stop. Like the storyline was so riveting. It's a holiday. Those are the things that I would have told you in the moment. Like, I just find this really fascinating. But there was something deeper going on where I couldn't stop. And it was like early morning till I actually stopped. And then I didn't get much sleep. And then I'm crabby with my kids on Christmas vacation or whatever. Like, that's an example of when you feel something where I can't stop. I'm eating this thing again and I'm not hungry, or I'm going to this one thing, whatever, any sense of binging. That's telling us something about a sense of shame that we're trying to cope. Substances, alcohol, drugs, substances that we go to relieve, marijuana. Excuse me, sorry. I guess that's a drug, but I've worked with a lot of young men who marijuana gives you a really peaceful feeling and gives you an escape, and it's not necessarily as bad for you as maybe some of the other narcotic drugs and so forth. And well, the question that I have is, what are you running away from, and why are you going to that thing? That's what we want to be curious about. A fourth one that we may not think about right away, but is criticism. We deal with shame through criticism, because if I don't feel very good about myself, I can at least feel a weird sense of feeling better by just feeling bad about other people as well. Kind of equalizes the balance. So workaholism gives me something that I can accomplish, a good feeling because I can accomplish it. Binging substance helps me escape from the shame, the boredom, or maybe even just questions that I don't have answers for. And then putting down others balances the scales in my mind. So those are ways that I think all of us are going to bump into these. I don't think the goal should be that we just try to avoid them in all of life, but rather to be curious when we see it rising up. Hey, what's going on underneath the hood? Just like the Israelites in Numbers 21, each of us have been bitten by sin. And Numbers 21 is a story where the venomous vipers come among the camp, and they bite the people of Israel, and they die unless can crawl and make it to a place where they can see the bronze serpent lifted up in the wilderness. And then they're healed just by seeing the bronze serpent lifted up. And John in I think I forget I think it's John 4. He talks about, just as the serpent was lifted up in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. And our healing from sin comes from bringing or looking on the Son of Man, but maybe more practically bringing Jesus into those areas of shame in our lives. Four realities of sin is that, first of all, it brings death. It's not going to bring life. And something I'll get into in the coming months as we continue this journey is, I talked about that time a few years ago when I was binging. I look back at that moment, that was 2018, 2019, and I see that as sin manifesting itself in my life. And I didn't pay enough attention to it. And later, I ended up struggling with some sexual temptations that I hadn't dealt with for years. And I don't think they're unconnected. It's disconnected by time, 4 to 5 years, but I wasn't aware of my own susceptibility to death. That's the other two realities of sin, is we are all bitten. We can't undo it. Even as we're experiencing what we call freedom from sin, we are still susceptible to sin. We are still in this creation bound by corruption. And we have that venom coursing through our veins. And when we give into it, it does bring death. But the good news is that God provides a way to be healed. And John 3, I guess, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. Healing is found through a holistic experience of Jesus. By inviting Jesus into our stories and allowing him to bring the gospel to each broken part, those places where we feel shame, we can experience deep sexual healing. And that's what this journey is going to be. I wanted to start here so that, first of all, we understand the problem. This isn't a problem we're going to just get away from. We're not going to pray a certain, we're not going to pray a certain prayer and then never again be tempted to just go down to my office to work when family's too complicated, or binge a TV show when we're going through a traumatic event in ministry or at church. The point I'm trying to illustrate is we will constantly face this temptation to solve our shame on our own. And that's what we want to be curious about and lean into and bring Jesus into, so that, first of all, we can, if we're in a cycle of sexual addiction, we can get out of the cycle, but also so that we can continue to grow in deeper and deeper healing in our journey. So some questions for us all to ponder, and those of us who are on this call will spend some time maybe discussing some of these. But what I'd like you to think about as you're watching this, whatever time you are watching this, is growing up, how was sin usually talked about in your church and your family? When life feels heavy for you right now, where do you instinctively go for relief? How have you seen self-fixing show up in your spiritual life? What do you do to fix the issues you bump into? How have you seen self-fixing? Oh, I'm sorry, I have that same question twice. What would change if healing didn't start with willpower, but with honesty? Sometimes when we sin again and we have that grief, we don't want that. We immediately feel the grief, which gives us a sense of power. And so we're determined again to, draw boundaries, or I'm going to meet with an accountability partner or whatever. That's kind of starting with willpower. We have to get honest about what's going on underneath in order for any meaningful change to start taking place. And so what would change if we started with honesty?